everyone. I'm Catherine. I'm also a director with the NHS for, I guess, just about a year now, maybe a little bit more. And it's my pleasure this evening and my honor to introduce this speaker. I work at VIU in the history department. I'm wearing the corporate colors today. I am also the acting dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the moment. And our speaker this evening is one of my colleagues, Dr. Stephen Davies, in the history department at Vancouver Island University. And Stephen has been teaching at VIU for, he doesn't want to tell me how long, a long time. He is one of our more senior members of the department and has been a very important colleague to me when I arrived just over 10 years ago. 25 years ago, Stephen started the project, the Canadian Letters and Images project, that we are going to hear about, a little bit about tonight. It's pretty much impossible to hear all about it because it's so large, and I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit about how large it is. But it's going on 25 years, and its impact has been quite phenomenal, reaching beyond just Nanaimo and Vancouver Island and even British Columbia. It is the largest digital archive, open access of war-related materials for Canadians in the world. And it's used by people around the world and has been used to write countless, well, I won't say countless because there's a number there somewhere. It's been used to write many historical works about the First World War, the Second World War, and related subjects. The one that I most recently read was all about cigarettes. And you can imagine that letters soldiers wrote home had a lot to do with cigarettes. It's true. So before I invite Stephen up, I wanted to make a small plug, I guess. The project that you're going to hear about today is run literally on a shoestring off the side of Stephen's desk, and with the help of many students, or not many students, but students over the years who do a lot of this work, and it's a part of their education and training. And it relies entirely on fundraising. And at the moment, the university is running its Giving Tuesday campaign, which lasts a month, which I know makes no sense. Giving Tuesday is one day, but the campaign is an entire month. So if you would like to give money, if you would like to donate money to the students who work on these projects to help them, you can do that through the website. If you search VIU Giving Tuesday, you'll find that website. And if you'd like more information about that, you can come and find me after the talk, and I'm happy to help out with that. During this month, the University Foundation is matching donations dollar for dollar, so every dollar you donate is matched. And that goes not just for CLIP, the Canadian Letters and Images project, but also for the Nanaimo Historical Society scholarships. We give out 2 scholarships each year to history students at VIU through the foundation, and anyone, any member, any non-member of the society who wants to support those scholarships can make a donation of, I think the minimum amount is $5. And it's matched dollar for dollar until, I believe, December 2nd. So as the end of the year approaches and we're all thinking about our donations, I hope you'll keep that in mind. And now, without further ado or advertising, please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Davies.
Well, good evening, and thank you for inviting me. As we stand here in the shadow of Remembrance Day that has just passed, I think it's appropriate to look at remembrance through the eyes and the words of those we remember. To do so, I will examine the First World War soldier experience through personal correspondence, building on examples from the Canadian Letters and Images project. At the heart of my talk tonight is thinking about the basic components of remembrance. That is, what we are remembering, and importantly, who we are remembering. For myself, the most important means to understand who we are remembering collectively and individually is through soldier correspondence. The very personal nature of letters permits us a glimpse into the soldiers' lives and provides us with an opportunity to see the world through their eyes without a lens of interpretation added through time. Just get this thing going here. Letters put a human face to war and remind us that war statistics represent human beings. These soldiers are not abstract figures. Behind those names on the cenotaph, we find someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father or brother. When we begin to speak of casualty figures in the tens of thousands, it's easy to forget that each number represents a real person, a person who had hopes, fears, ambitions, and loves. Letters permit us the opportunity to reduce the great events of history, in this case war, to the level of the participants. Letters permit us to know those individuals as individuals, and not simply as a statistic or a name on a cenotaph. That is the very human dimension that pointedly reminds us about what remembrance is about. In June of 1917, Murray Dennis wrote to his fiancée, Margaret Monroe, of having to live with, as he put it, the life fate weaves for us. "I'm loving you," he wrote to Margaret, "as much now as at first, honey girl. Your love shows so grandly in the sweet, tender ways you tell me every thought." In closing the letter, Murray Dennis created a powerful image of two lovers separated by distance and experience. "Now I'm going to turn in," he told Margaret. "Just a rubber sheet on the ground and my great coat over me. Will you come, dear? Here's a good night kiss, and to sleep, your head on my shoulder." What makes these sentiments all the more touching was that Murray Dennis was writing from the trenches of France, his love letter eloquently juxtaposing a spirit of tenderness and innocence in the midst of such horror. It's that seeming antithesis of war and humanity, the individual lost in the midst of chaos, which makes the letter so important. There's so much in the story of Murray Dennis, but tragically, that love story ended with his death on August 9th, 1918. For many of us, the focal point of Remembrance Day was a ceremony at the cenotaph, a process repeated across the nation in communities large and small. And yet, as we stand in front of a cenotaph, the question is not merely one of what we are remembering, but who we are remembering. Cenotaphs are carved with the names of men from the community who gave their lives in war. We gather there year after year, but how many of us actually look at the names? Or if we do they hold any meaning beyond the abstract collection of men long dead? Names carved in stone, but nothing more, largely unknown by a community who each year mourns their passing. The challenge of remembrance is to move beyond those names to the individuals they represent. One of the most difficult things I find to teach my students is the human cost of war. If we talk about Canada's over 60,000 dead for World War I, that's a figure that is difficult for most students to comprehend. It's not simply the number 60,000, it's 60,000 lives. The numbers become so large and so abstract that they become almost meaningless in the terms of the human component. But there is a means for students to understand what that figure of 60,000 really means. The key is breaking down those numbers to the smallest component, the individual soldier. Once a student understands the richness of one individual life and the loss it represents, then the figure of 60,000 begins to have real meaning. And the best means to accomplish that, I'll just talk my usual lecture voice if that's good. We all good? All right. Now where was I? Accomplished through the personal correspondence. I am the director of the Canadian Letters and Images Project, located at Vancouver Island University, a digital archive of the Canadian war experience, both home front and battlefront, from any period of Canada's past. Through the digitization of contemporary letters, diaries, photographs, and other related materials, the project permits Canadians to tell their story and Canada's story in their own words. The project is a means to put a human face to war, and remind us that war is ultimately about people, most of them ordinary and largely forgotten. Now in its 25th year, the project is the largest digital archive of its type in Canada. It contains more than 750 individual collections, ranging from the Riel Resistance through to Cyprus peacekeepers in the 1970s. In total, we have digitized more than 35,000 letters, as well as thousands of photographs and other items. What makes the project unique is that it only borrows material from Canadians across the country, digitizes them, and returns them to the family. These stories quite literally come out of the closets and attics of Canadians from across the country. The letters and clip are means to make the invisible, visible. These are not the generals in the textbooks. These are the ordinary and very often forgotten Canadians. The farm boy from Saskatchewan, the accountant from Toronto, the logger from BC. Accessibility to the past defines this project. The website is always free. There are no paywalls or membership required. The letters and clip provide a window into the lives of individuals long dead, bringing us to once again give them a voice so that their lives are not erased. As a source, letters provide us with what we might call history in the raw. These are windows into the inner thoughts of the participants, an opportunity to see the world as they did, without a lens of interpretation added through time. They provide an intimacy and a richness impossible to recreate in any other source. They poignantly remind us of the impact of war and of the lives lost. The letters of Will Mays, a pastor from Nanaimo, provide stark visual images of the war. Chilling indeed is its depiction of a walk through a battlefield in July of 1917. What Mays conveyed was the terrible aftermath of battles as the war moved on and left behind its material and human wreckage. Sometimes we would come across one of our Canadian boys, Mays told his wife, and when we found any remains that looked like a Canadian, we would bury them as well as we could. Mays described also the tragic fate of many Canadian soldiers. In doing so, he touched on what was an all too common dimension of the relationship of soldiers and loved ones at home. I came across one of our boys, Mays said, decomposed beyond all recognition, of course, but he lay just as he had fallen. The head was missing, but all the accoutrement was buckled on. His rifle and helmet lay close by. We buried what remained of him. I tried to find something by which he might be identified, but it was impossible. Poor boy. In some faraway home in Canada, someone is mourning the loss of husband, son, or sweetheart. And the saddest thing of all is they will never know how he died or where he is buried. Mays captured in those few sentences one of the saddest realities of the war. That young Canadian soldier was now part of an ever-growing missing category. A Canadian soldier with no known grave, lost forever to family and friends, with only a name carved on a memorial somewhere to mark his passing. Having seen firsthand the battlefield carnage, Mays knew very well the anguish that death without closure would bring to those waiting on the home front. What is striking in soldier correspondence is a sense of duty, and as well a stoic acceptance of what might lie ahead. Hart Leach, a law student from Winnipeg, found himself writing a letter on the eve of battle in September 1916. It was his last letter to his mother before he went into battle. A stoic acceptance of his likely fate, and yet one tinged with humor. September 13th, 1916. Dear Mother, just a wee note. I am going over the parapet, and the chances of a sub getting back alive are about nix. If I do get back, well, you can give me the horse laugh. If not, this will let you know that I kicked out with my boots on. So cheer up, old dear, and don't let the newspapers use you for material for a Saturday magazine feature. You know the kind, where the sweet-faced, gray-haired little mother, clutching the last letter from her boy to her breast, sobbed, "He was such a fine lad," as she furtively brushed the glistening tears from her eyes with a dish rag, etc., etc. I'm going to tell you this in case my company commander forgets. Your son is a soldier, and a doggone good one, too, even if he does say it himself, as he shouldn't. And if he gets pipped, he'll be doing his blooming job. In a way, it's darn funny. All the gang are writing post-mortem letters and kind of half ashamed of themselves for doing it. As one of our officers said, if I mail it and come through the show, I'll be a joke. If I tear it up and get killed, I'll be sorry I didn't send it. So there you are. Hart Leach died 3 days later. The post-mortem letters add a jarring depth to what lies behind the names on a cenotaph or memorial. Soldiers consciously dealt with death on a daily basis, and often we see a frank acknowledgement of the reality of death, including their own. The ambition of Charles Robertson from Ontario was to fly with the Royal Flying Corps, and he took private flying lessons in Canada before he went off to England to join the RFC. The life expectancy of a pilot on the Western Front was not very long. In May 1917, he wrote a letter to his father which was a tacit recognition of and acceptance of what was likely to be his fate. "My dear father," Robertson wrote, "I've asked them to send this letter to you in case I'm reported killed or missing. I say missing because in the Flying Corps, that word in nearly every case means killed. Death seems so very far away as we sit here in the warm spring sunshine with the sweet smoky air of France making every moment out of doors a pleasure. But it is not far away. The ever-changing faces around our mess tell me that. The fact of the disappearance one by one of the cheery boys who for days or weeks have sat opposite me at the table. And the continuous heavy thundering of the guns, which makes the very ground shake as I write, is in itself abundant proof that death is very near at hand. I know, dear Pater, that you and my dear wife and all my loved ones are praying constantly for my safety. In case your prayers are answered as you wish, this letter will never reach you. There are two prayers that I say earnestly just before any flight. The one by far that seems the best to me is that I may be kept brave and determined to do my duty, whatever the circumstances and whatever the odds. I have only one desire, Father, when my time comes, to die like a Christian and a Robertson. If you should learn that I've gone out in that way, try to be happy for my sake, for you know I will be happy." Robertson was shot down and killed in July of 1917, 3 months after writing that letter. As our veteran population ages, and indeed all our veterans from World War I are now gone, it raises the question, how can you remember their sacrifices? It also raises the question of its relevance to today's generation. Can events of a century ago and the over 60,000 Canadian dead hold any meaning for young Canadians? I can answer that by relating my teaching experiences on the Western Front, where I conducted university field schools. My students were profoundly moved, often to the point of tears, when confronted face to face with the realities of war as they still exist on the Western Front. Let me briefly share their experiences on the field school as they linked letters from this project to the Canadians commemorated overseas. The field schools were an intensive 3-week experience, with our classroom being the cemeteries, battlefields, and memorials on the Western Front. This is not a tour. The students were working on 3 university courses as part of this school. It was an intense World War I experience. Our field school is not so much about battles as it was about individuals, taking the immensity of the Western Front and reducing it to the individual level. That is where I believe the students really learned about war. And as such, the letters and remembrance were an integral part of everything that we did. Each student was assigned an individual soldier from the Canadian Letters and Images Project who had died on the Western Front. Their assignment was to read all their personal materials, create a biography of that soldier from those materials, and then present the story to the other students. This was the practical application of the project in the field, making history come alive by moving it from the abstract to the tangible, from the website to the cemetery. Our most important classrooms were the cemeteries. We spent a lot of time in cemeteries, as each cemetery has a unique story to tell. I don't believe my students will ever forget walking through rows of graves, seeing that those soldiers were their own age, young men who had never had the opportunity to live the life that they had before them. It was an emotional awakening, making a connection with individuals they had never known, born long before them. And that is really what is at the heart of remembrance, that connection. But it wasn't just Canadian cemeteries. We also spent time in French cemeteries and in German cemeteries. The students came to realize the universality of experience shared by the participants and the universality of loss and grief. The most moving experience for the students, the one which really made them realize what remembrance is about, were the individual presentations of their assigned soldier. What I had not told them was that the presentations we made on site at the soldier's grave or memorial. It was here, using letters from the project, that the true significance of the casualty statistics became clear. The students reduced the war to the level of the individual and saw that soldier not as a number, but a person like themselves. A person who had loves and dreams, who had family, who laughed and who loved sweets. All that ended by the war. It was a very emotional experience for everyone, and many tears were shed. My students were very conscious of the fact that they might very well have been the first to visit those graves or touch the name on the memorial. It was a humbling experience that connected them through time with an individual who had died long ago. After that, I don't believe the students will ever look at war the same again, nor think of Remembrance Day in the same way that they had. When they look at a cenotaph now, it's not simply a row of names. Their experiences have transformed those names into individuals, like themselves, each name a rich life lost. And that is the power of the letters. I've heard today that today's generation doesn't really understand what remembrance means. I don't believe that, particularly after witnessing my students work their way across the Western Front. Letters also raise the question of that in remembering who we don't remember, whose names are not on the cenotaph, but who too, in a very real manner, sacrificed their lives. The letters of Sidney Hayward echoes those losses that we don't remember. Hayward was buried by a shell in Belgium in 1915, and thereafter suffered from neurasthenia, more commonly referred to as shell shock. Following treatments in England, he was invalided back to Canada in late 1918 as medically unfit, still suffering from shell shock. On his return, he was sent to Tuxedo Park, a facility in Winnipeg that specialized in shell shock victims. In his letters to his wife, and he did recover to live to old age, there's one particularly disturbing passage in a letter which underscores who we do not, or who we do and do not remember each November. In his letter of April 2nd, 1919, he described his hospital experience. "I am in the neurasthenia ward," he told his wife, "and all around me are men who are shivering and shaking like jellies." His letter description echoes the poignant and disturbing poem Mental Cases by the British poet Wilfred Owen, about returning soldiers who survived the war, but for all intents and purposes, whose lives were lost, not celebrated as heroes, nor remembered on cenotaphs and memorials. In examining the centrality of correspondence to understanding the human loss in war and the concept of remembrance, I want to conclude as I began with a short story of another soldier. This is the story of Private George Broom. It is through correspondence that permits us to know George Broom as the individual he once was, rather than the casualty statistic that he became. George Broom was on one level unremarkable. He was an ordinary Canadian who grew up, heeded the call to war as a teenager in 1915, died in war, and left little behind to indicate that he'd ever been alive. There is seemingly little to separate George Broom from the millions of other ordinary Canadians of his day. And yet, he is quite remarkable for what he did in his relatively short life. He went to war as a teenager, at first enthusiastically, then reluctantly, then enthusiastically again, where by all accounts he became a good soldier. Wounded in the Battle of Vimy Ridge in the spring of 1917, he lay paralyzed in hospital until he died 6 months later and was buried in England. But there's more to his story than the sparse details contained in his official service record. Fortunately for us, George Broom did leave behind a few letters and 2 photographs. These are letters which trace the progress of a boy to a man in the service of his country. The first letter of George Broom is June 27, 1915, from his battalion camp in Manitoba. His eagerness and enthusiasm for the war is evident in the fact that he is not yet old enough to enlist on his own. He wrote, "Dear Mother, just a line to say I am well. I received your letter all right. Will you write out yours and Father's consent to my enlisting and send it to me? I should have had it, but I forgot about it." Only a few days later, though, on July 1st, George wrote to his mother with a change of heart after visiting some family friends. "Both Mr. and Mrs. Leggett are upset at my enlisting and want me out of it. When I think it over, possibly I should not have done so. They have brought out a few points which made me very sorry for joining. I did not think of you at the time, and I do not know yet if you cared about it, but I am sorry I did act so hastily. If you think it over, I should not go for many reasons. I thought only of honor and country, but other things count. Possibly you better not send your consent and let me out. 2 or 3 lines saying you do not wish me to fight will free me, but it is as you wish." In September 1915, we find George Broome in England and closer to the war. We can only guess at the decisions made to bring him to that point. It was clear, though, that the reluctant teenager was becoming a determined soldier. On December 1st, 1915, he told his mother, "I was reading in the paper about a meeting of peace cranks. It was about to begin, but a lot of wounded colonial soldiers, including a good bunch of Canadians, took charge. They threw out the speakers, tore up their banners, and turned it into a recruiting meeting. That shows what a British soldier thinks of peace now. The only way to get peace is to put the Germans down and out." And yet, that determined soldier was still very much a boy tied to his mother, a son who had brought a little piece of home and family with him to war. In a letter at Christmas 1915, George told his mother, "I still have the little green stone you gave me. I have sewn it into the pocket of my coat and carry it all the time." Those two sentences speak volumes about war and remind us how human those faceless statistics really are. With all the equipment a soldier had to carry into battle, and through all the horrors of battle, George Broome carried with him the little stone that his mother had given him. On Easter Monday, 1917, Broome was part of the assault by Canadians at Vimy Ridge, where he was shot in the spine and paralyzed. He was sent back to England to recover. On September 17th, George wrote to his mother after he'd been moved to a new hospital, "I do not like this place much. They have no system for handling cases such as mine. I also miss my acquaintances there. I was between two fellows the same as myself, and they were both very nice. When the sisters referred to us, we were the three bears, the three babies, and other pet names, but we were always together. I miss them to talk to, and I miss all the sisters. It's surprising the friends one makes in a place like that." George was also optimistic about his recovery, telling his mother, "I'm feeling pretty well. I can feel a little now in my right knee and shin. I am getting along slowly." The last letter came from the hospital, but not from George. It came from one of the nursing sisters, a letter from nurse to parent, a letter between two women who had both cared for George. "Dear Mrs. Broome, I felt I must write to tell you how I grieved for you. Your boy, Private George Broome, was such a bright, dear, considerate boy, so cheerful and considerate. I know he had a good home, as he had often told me, and his joy when he got letters was great. It is hard to think it, I know, but he is happier now than he would have been had he lived. It would have been so hard for him to have been an invalid all his life." And with that final letter, the circle was closed. The boy, who had become the young man and soldier, was once again just a boy, grieved by two women who had cared for him. Ultimately, the stories of George Broome, Charles Robertson, and all the others are the stories of individuals, ordinary individuals, caught up in extraordinary circumstances. Letters are a poignant reminder that war is more than simply about death and destruction. War is also about relationships, battlefront and home front, soldiers and loved ones. Letters open up a crucial dimension to our understanding of the war experience and permit us to see the war through their eyes and their words. Through letters, soldiers from long ago are not simply names on a cenotaph or a statistic in a book. Through their words, they become once again the individuals they once were. The challenge of remembrance is not to mourn them as casualties, but to remember them as the individuals they once were, to understand the enormity of loss that lies behind each of those names. Our tendency is to mourn them as a casualty by focusing on their death, and if we do that, then they will forever remain simply a name carved in stone. It is their correspondence, their stories, which permit us to understand who they were, not what they became. I would ask you to spend some time in the project, to read some of their letters, to more fully appreciate what lies behind those names on a cenotaph and what is at the very heart of remembrance. Thank you.
Dr. Davies, that was a beautiful presentation. You really illustrated the importance of not reducing somebody down to a number, and the humanity of soldiers, the great courage that it takes, and the experience. I'm going to pass this on to you as a thank you from the Nanaimo Historical
Thank you.
Society. But I also wanted to see if anybody had any questions for Dr. Davies, and then we'll end it there. Yeah, Patricia.
Thank you very much. That was very moving, and
Thank you.
had a lot of emotion yesterday as well at downtown. It was well attended, and it's hard to think of all the losses, but it's also hard to think of the continuing battles that are going on around the world, like this quote right here.
Yes.
And now I have a very simple question. How did they mail letters back then?
There's a very sophisticated postal service, mail that we distribute right up to the trenches.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
it would take, depending on the letter from Canada, it could take 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks. But England, if you're stationed in England,
Okay.
over to France, 2 days.
My goodness.
No, they had a very sophisticated system.
It sounds like we could learn something.
I have a few thoughts or questions, but I'll just maybe start with this one or leave it with this one. I'm wondering if the letters were subject to a review and redaction and censorship for intelligence and security purposes, as well as morale back then.
Well, there's two types of censorship that comes into play. One is the official military censorship, which doesn't allow you to put in battalions or locations. That's why you always have that somewhere in France, because the soldiers knew where they were, but the military wouldn't let them. And then the other kind of censorship is the self-censorship. Now, some letters are fairly graphic, such as the letter of Mays describing the battlefield, but very often the letters for war letters are quite benign. They're writing back home to their family, often to women, and so they do soften the worst aspects often. I was just working on a collection this past week, a soldier from Vancouver, and what I noticed, I'm transcribing letters, he had a code in his letters. And so if you looked under the words, you can find little dots, and that would spell out his location. So some were trying to circumvent that censorship.
Yeah, I suppose POW letters were highly scrutinized.
Yes, they had very limited, they had like a 1 page, and so it had to be approved before it went out of the camp. So those are pretty, simple.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't need the mic, I'll just try to speak as I was, I guess. Now that we're in the digital age, Dr. Davies, it'd probably be, I imagine, a little bit more difficult to access personal letters because we might have gone to email, text messages, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
In the future, for future generations, how do you see that personal experience being captured when it's hid behind a personal email account or something like that?
Historians of the future won't be able to do what I do.
Okay.
With conflicts, because as you say, the correspondence tends to be emails or cell phones. A lot of these letters, the families kept them, they're wrapped up in ribbon, they're put away, they're very special. People aren't printing off the emails and wrapping them up in ribbon. So it will be very difficult for future historians to replicate what we can do, basically, sort of up to the 70s, and then things, 80s, things change.
Right.
I have kids who are 18 and 20, and they were the first generation to not learn cursive. And I just wondered if you're encountering that, and if the university now has to teach cursive as an extra language.
It is a very huge problem because all our letters, are coming in cursive. It's easy for me, and I have some students that can read cursive because everything needs to be transcribed and then put into a Word document. But I have other students who cannot read cursive at all. I had one of my assignments where they were reading service files from World War I, and the student said, I had to take it home to my mother because I couldn't read this. And so it is difficult. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we transcribe the letters, because they're searchable, but they're also useful for students, because if I just threw up a letter in cursive, they wouldn't be able to read it. So it is a problem.
I think you're looking for people to help you transcribe some of the cursive.
I've still got, I have some volunteers that are working on that. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it is a skill set that's been lost. I see that they're bringing it back into the schools, teaching cursive, but then I'm looking at the students who I teach or in the education program going, I don't know how you're going to teach cursive because you can't do it yourself. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out. Anything else? Yeah.
Oh, I had some old letters and I submitted them to AI, and AI was able to translate these old letters quite well, better than I could read them.
There are some programs that are coming out. This is all relatively new because the cursive writing, especially with the kinds of materials we use, they vary from writer to writer. And with AI learning to basically read a set of letters, I'd have to look into it. I know there's some new software coming out, but I don't know. I like the old-fashioned reading it myself.
What made you decide to do this?
Well, I always had interest. I mean, I am a historian, and I teach World War I courses. And I always thought that the best way for students to understand the impact of war was through letters, to read that human story. Now, the problem was when I started this 25 years ago, there was virtually no Canadian material available on the internet. So I created this project basically for my students, hoping that perhaps I could get 100, 200 letters that they could work with. And since then, it's snowballed, and we're well over 35,000 letters, and it just keeps rolling along. But it was really meant as a small-scale project to help out my students, and then it's gone national.
I have, my father fought in World War II, and he wrote a letter to his mom. He used to write letters all from different places where he was serving at, and he would always make note of buying different stamps from these countries and then mail, and sometimes there's 4 or 5 stamps from one country. So my mom made or my grandmother, sorry, his mom made a stamp album of all of his albums. So around the 37 to 39, there's a huge amount of stamps from Amsterdam, where he was based at that time. And then she kept one of the letters, so it's in that photo out in that album also. But it's kind of neat when I hearing this, it kind of triggers part of me is that maybe I should maybe write about it, what my father had recorded. So it's kind of neat. Thank you for this. Thank you.
Well, one of the problems I think is that, and I see this all the time here. People have these letters, and the grandparents die, and they're cleaning out the house, and they go, "Who would be interested in this?" And we've got boxes of letters that have come out of bins that they've thrown out. People don't realize, once these are gone, these are gone, and so we try to preserve, as much as we can. At least if we can't get them because of the work trying to get them into the site, they're all at least digitally preserved, and as time permits, we'll bring them in. But every letter that's lost is lost forever, and each of these is a unique story.
Thank you so very much for what you do.
I think earlier on you said your cutoff was 1970 for Cyprus?
That's sort of the latest we have. We have some peacekeepers from 1970s in Cyprus. But again, any of the more recent conflicts, we don't have anything from that. And we take whatever we get. We're open to whatever we get. Sort of like, I'll get a box. It's like a historian. It's great. It's like a kid at Christmas. I open it up. I never know what I'm going to find. And we do have materials that go back to Canadians in the American Civil War. We've got the Riel Resistance, South African War, World War I, World War II, Korea. So any event where conflict where Canadians have been involved, that's what we do.
Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you again, Dr. Davies. Okay, and as always, there's refreshments at the back. We hope you'll stick around and have a few chats. And yeah, thank you so much for being here today.